This is Mark Reddick. We've been learning and playing with something that makes us think of you and all the people we met earlier this year. And I wanted to tell you about it and thought video might be the best way. Um, you know, a key problem with something like social life on campus is seeing what's really going on so you can know what's worth trying and once you try something, knowing whether it really makes any difference. I mean, what's going on is hidden in all those conversations in dorm rooms and the classroom and Instagram posts and whispered here and there, like moments among millions of moments. Um, so this thing I'm excited about is this kind of an imagine if. Like, what if you could gather scores or hundreds of short stories about moments on campus that matter to people? And what if the people who told those stories could also tell you why they mattered? You know, what the story means to them. And then what if you could visualize patterns in those stories to see where the experiences are common to a lot of people and where some people are trying something new or identify pockets of better. And then finally, what if you could keep doing that so you can see how patterns of stories are changing over time as you try stuff? So I have this new toy. For me, the exciting part is not exactly the toy, which is a kind of software. There's a couple of vendors for it, but it's the way of working the story that the software supports. And the heart of the approach is story collection. Little, they call them micro narratives about people's experience that are gathered through prompts. Here's a couple of examples. They're like, no hypothesis, non-leading. What story would you tell a friend or family member that was thinking about attending the school? Describe an experience that's greatly influenced your studies or quality of life for better or for worse. And people can enter their stories through phones or computers, a website or paper or kiosk. You can put out a general call. When people do this, often they get community members to be like citizen journalists or story collectors, kind of, street ethnographers. And when we conduct surveys or do ethnographic studies, we act like experts or get experts to analyze the results and figure out what's going on. But a key principle of this approach is that the people who tell the stories are the ones who control the meaning. So once they enter this story, they use controls like these to capture how this story illustrates their experience. So in this first example, someone is saying that their story is less about sense of belonging or being accepted, more about being part of something bigger. Or down here, it's less about contributing to the community and more about developing ourselves and developing social connections. Yeah, so you drag these dots. And then once we have a collection of stories, we can start to look for patterns. The software helps visualize it. So just as an example, here's a bunch of stories that show how people indicated their experience of pressure to conform or encouragement to become their best self. So that's the horizontal, pressure to conform, encouragement for becoming your best self. And the vertical is the strength of the pressure. And the color of the dot says, oh, where'd the pressure come from? Student leaders, peers, faculty, staff, admin, policies, so on. So each dot represents someone's stories. And if we hover over it, we can see a headline. And if we circled an area, we'd pull up the actual stories over on the side. So we're mixing qualitative and quantitative. We have the patterns and the people experience and the emotions under those patterns. So now we get a really useful and generative pair of questions. And the first is, where do we see that some people are having experiences that are closer to desired qualities, ones that line up with the world we'd like to see more than other stories? And the second one is our creative brief. How do we get more stories like these and fewer like those? So I mean, it's really interesting. Like, not what ideal can we imagine, but how do we get more? Okay, here's people who got some support for becoming their best self. Can we get some upward movement? Can we get fewer weak become your best self and more strong? How can we imagine? That's an interesting creative brief. Or people who have light pressure to conform, could we see movement towards light pressure to become your best self? How about these really bad ones up here? Like, what does it mean for, there's already people who aren't so strong about conformance. What can we learn? What can we try to move down? But these are influencers. Maybe strong influence is their thing. What would it mean to move to the right? How can we try it? So that we get creative briefs out of these patterns. So now, based on those questions, coming up with ideas feels a lot different than a typical, design workshop. Instead of looking for solutions, we're dealing with real, emergent behaviors. So we come up with a portfolio of experiments, things we think might be worth trying, not because we'll learn whether we found a solution, but because we want to find out what attracts people to better patterns of behavior and relationship. So there's a rubric for these, which I'm not going to go way into, but the thing is to anticipate how we'll know if it's succeeding or failing, and then how we're going to react to it. So there's a way to kind of manage this this portfolio of probes or experiments. So noticing what happens once we try things means another round of story collection. It's common to go through kind of cycles of, we'll get some initial stories and then do experiment, collect, reflect, experiment, collect, more stories, reflect, and so on. Now, I made a prototype of a story collector using just imagine that we were, I needed some reason to play. So I used Sewanee as this learning assignment to myself. And I'm showing this demo at double speed. So pause it if you want to read what's going on. But this just shows what it's like to use the tool. And if this was real, we'd go through a process of really designing this instrument together to serve the goals we agreed at together. But it's really just an illustration, a kind of imagine if. And it borrows from other applications of the same tool to, like, organizational culture. But as an exercise, I added some campus-specific features. The details don't matter so much, but I hope this gives you a sense of what it's like. It's pretty easy to use. Really, the longer learning curve has to do with creating a good structure of people who can use this well. So just one quick story. This has been used all over the world in a lot of different situations, but in Wales, I think, I was inspired by something that impressed me. That this was at nation scale, and they invited students from across the country to become what they called journalists of their own situation, gathering stories from people in their own slice of life. And once they started seeing patterns in the stories, they paired those students with people from an older generation. So now there's young people and one or two generations above them, and they came up with, like, things worth trying, with experiments worth trying. And if those proposals passed the this is worth trying and the safe to fail filters, like, oh, this is, the organizers are like, this is totally worth trying. They made trios. So now the young person, the student, the older person, and now they added a policymaker from the region or from the nation. And those three, old, young policymaker, got a little funding, a little support to actually conduct the experiment that they had proposed. And then they could watch the subsequent pattern shift. So I like the way that approach is a kind of scaffolding, not only for sensing, but also for having the people who live it be the people who are imagining how to shift it and engaging with it. So to summarize, oh look, I made pictures. I forgot I made pictures. Look, there's a young and old and policymaker. Um, so this really isn't. Some people see this and go like, oh, it's a better way to conduct surveys. But really, once you get the hang of this and you can collect stories repeatedly, you've built a kind of distributed sensor network. You don't need to go through all the trouble of commissioning research. Once it's part of your culture, you can just create new story prompts and go out there and ask the question. So just 2 points about the big ideas at the heart of the approach. One is that it represents a shift in focus from individuals to the collective, and from behavior to supports or healthier patterns. Like it's like, I think when you just see it, it looks like a research tool, but when you live with it as a way of working, um, it's about supporting becoming together, and invites, connects to people's intrinsic motivations. Um, and the other that is less about coming up with some shiny point on the horizon that you want to head to, some vision or concept, but more, well, what direction do we want to go and how quickly? How much can we afford to invest? And just how do we notice if we're moving down that road? We're following our desired arrow. So I'll stop there. Thanks for listening to me talk about my new toy. Let me know if you want to talk more. And I can always provide links to articles and talks, and there's a whole literature on this stuff. But I wanted to let you know about it and let you know we're excited and thinking of you. So good holidays to you. Talk soon.